1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3. Один, два, три. 1, 2.
Thank you all for coming. We're ready to begin. Good afternoon and welcome to the press conference of international observers for Ukraine's 2014 early parliamentary elections. I'm Richard Solash. I'm the Director of Communications for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. We have simultaneous translation, so please do use your headphones for that if you need it. I'd like to ask everybody now to please silence your mobile phones so that we don't disturb the press conference. Our panel will offer the preliminary conclusions of this international election observation mission. Copies of the preliminary findings will be available at the conclusion of the press conference. Today on our panel, we have Mr. Kent Harstead, the OSCE Special Coordinator and the leader of the OSCE Short-Term Observer Mission, Mr. Christopher Chope, the head of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe's delegation. We also have Ms. Doris Barnett, the head of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly delegation. We have Mr. Andrei Plenkovic, the head of the European Parliament's delegation. We have Rasa Yuknevichiene, the head of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly delegation. And we also have Ms. Tana de Zulueta, the head of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights Election Observation Mission. Our panelists will first make some statements, followed by an opportunity for questions. We will now begin with Mr. Harstead.
Thank you, Richard. First of all, I would like to thank my colleagues along this table and their fellow colleagues for their good cooperation during this observation mission. I also would like to thank ODIHR, who have done an excellent job on the spot here and doing a lot of the work on the ground. I will start by saying at this crucial moment for the future of this country, Ukraine's institutions and voters responded to the daunting challenges with an election that largely upheld democratic commitments. That response, and in particular the authorities' determination to enable voting in as many areas of the country as possible, demonstrate a resilience that will help the country to overcome its national and international challenges. The elections marked an important step in Ukraine's aspirations to consolidate democratic elections in line with its international commitments. There were many positive points to the process, such as an impartial and efficient Central Election Commission, an ample contested election that offered voters real choice and a general respect for fundamental freedoms. The newly elected parliament should take the political responsibility to ensure that key reforms are passed to prevent certain bad practices noted in our statement from becoming entrenched. As well, grievances should be resolved with respect for the rule of law and through democratic institutions. In most of the country, election day proceeded calmly with a few disturbances. Voting and counting were transparent and assessed positively overall. However, the early stages of the tabulation process were more negatively viewed by observers, with tensions in some cases. The elections took place in an increasingly challenging political and security environment, notwithstanding the September Minsk agreements. The campaign was competitive and visible, although we also noted intimidation and threats against candidates and workers. The legal framework is generally adequate for the conduct of democratic elections, although some concerns remain. This will be an important area for newly elected Parliament to address. Public perceptions of corruption are pervasive and threaten to undermine confidence in the election process. Much work remains to be done in this area to improve public trust in this field. The media environment is diverse. However, the lack of autonomy from political or corporate interest for much of the media restricts independent reporting. We were pleased to see state-owned national TV host debates among political parties. We have had a comprehensive observation efforts with more than 900 observers from 43 countries across the country. For the first time, the OSCE's Parliamentary Assembly also observed voting beyond the territory of the country observed. We sent a team following the election on the day of procedures in the Ukrainian embassy in Moscow. I want to say a thank you to the authorities and most importantly to the Ukrainian people for your warm hospitality throughout our entire observation process. This was a collective effort, so I now want to give an opportunity to my colleagues to add their thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll continue now with Mr. Chope.
Thank you. And can I begin by thanking Kent and his team for the fantastic amount of work and good quality work that they put into this observation. And I would also like to echo his words about the really warm welcome which we've received from the Ukrainian people during our time in your wonderful country. The Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly has been involved in monitoring elections here since 1994. We've monitored since that time every presidential and parliamentary election, and this time we brought together a team of 40 parliamentarians, in other words, elected members of parliaments from 20 different countries in the 47 member countries of the Council of Europe. And so the people we've had in our team have got a lot of experience of democracy in practice. And they've been deployed throughout the country. We had people in Odessa, we had people in Lviv, we've had people in Dnipropetrovsk, and other places which I won't seek to try and pronounce. All reported favourably on a calm and well-conducted election. I think the sombre mood which we detected amongst the Ukrainian people in these elections reflects the gravity of the crisis facing the country. The people have now chosen a new Verkhovna Rada, which will be very different in composition from its predecessor. And in so doing, the Ukrainians have shown their desire for action to address their needs. The Verkhovna Rada must now accept this new mandate in the same spirit and work quickly to implement reforms, many of which are long overdue. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and the Venice Commission are ready to assist in this urgent and important work. And that work involves, obviously, the Constitution, reforms to the judiciary, reforms to electoral law, and implementation of a lot of very good statements about the desire to address the corrosive corruption which has bedeviled this country for so long. So there are enormous challenges ahead, and can I, on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe delegation, say we wish the new government and the new members of the Verkhovna Rada well in their immense task that lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll continue now with Ms. Barnett.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon to us. My dear colleague from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, my friend Kent Hersted, who led our joint endeavor here in the Ukraine, has just a couple of minutes ago told you about our observations and drawn some first conclusions. As leader of the delegation of my Parliamentary Assembly, the OSCE EPA, in this observation, I do, of course, support his statement. Let me reiterate two important points of the statement and tell you what I, as a German politician who really cares about your country, would like to recommend to you. First, we found it very impressive how the Ukraine managed to organize democratic elections in a situation marked by internal disputes, occupation, and an armed conflict inside the country, which is supported from the outside. Second, I want to make it perfectly clear, these difficulties impacted the elections but do not invalidate them. On the contrary, our conclusions indicate that the elections largely upheld democratic standards and can therefore contribute to a quick consolidation on the democratic institutions of the country in order to lay the basis for finding ways out of the crisis. And I learned today out of the press that is also what the big neighbor, Russia, is expecting. The 27 seats that will be left empty in the new parliament serve as a stark reminder that illegal armed groups prevent voters in some parts of the country from being able to vote. These illegal actions do not call into question the validity of the overall election. We look forward to these seats being filled as soon as possible so that the representatives of those areas can join their colleagues in an open dialogue to the benefit of all Ukrainians. I would like to stress that the more than 900 observers in the international election observation that we here on the podium represent have seen irregularities which are specified in our report. There is quite some room for improvement, but what we saw yesterday were dedicated polling station workers and dedicated voters that performed well. This work could even stand up favorably in comparison with long-standing established democracies. One thing, however, does not constitute mature democratic behavior. This is when political parties or their leaders or representatives attempt to explain expected losses through electoral fraud even before election day. We all know the purpose of that. It should discredit the functioning of democratic institutions. Only strong and democratically legitimate institutions can achieve what Ukraine needs now: the implementation of necessary reforms, including relaunching of the much-needed internal and international dialogue. And let me tell you, it is not sufficient to adopt laws. Parliaments need to remain engaged to make sure that laws are implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from Mr. Plenković from the European Parliament delegation.
Thank you very much. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me congratulate the Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian Central Electoral Commission, and the Electoral Commission and all the levels of the countries for great efforts which they have put and invested into organizing these early parliamentary elections. I think it is important to remember that they have been organized in an extremely difficult context, whereby Crimea has been illegally annexed by Russia, and whereby a number of areas in the two oblasts, Donetsk and Lugansk, was prevented from organizing these parliamentary elections, and therefore the new Verkhovna Rada will have 27 MPs less. With these congratulations, I would also like to appreciate the work of the International Observation Mission of other parliamentary assemblies and thank them for the cooperation, and in particular also thank the colleagues, members of the European Parliament, who in total 14 observed the elections in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in Dnipropetrovsk, in Cherkasy and in Odessa. Everything that we saw and that we witnessed puts us in the position to draw the conclusions that elections in these places were orderly in a legal and normal fashion, which is very similar to the countries where we come from the countries members of the European Union. And therefore, we are very pleased with the general conduct of these elections. Of course, on a technical level, there are a number of improvements to be done, whether it is the legislative framework or the technology of the campaign and the electoral process and the media context, but our general impression has been positive. What also I would like to say is the message that comes out of these elections. I think that the Ukrainian people has, after Maidan, clearly chosen Europe as its orientation, and Ukrainian people and the authorities have clearly chosen peace. These are the two most important messages that we see out of these early parliamentary elections, and we hope that the new Verkhovna Rada will be constituted swiftly, that it will form a stable government which will embark on comprehensive European-oriented reforms, and the European Parliament, along with other institutions, will accompany the Ukrainian government in implementing the association agreement, which will be like a guiding tool for the reforms to be undertaken in the months to come. I am also very pleased that no party so far has contested the results of the elections, which proves the clarity of the process and the entire overall conduct of the elections. Therefore, from the point of view of the European Parliament observers, I congratulate the Ukrainian people and the organizers of these elections for all the efforts that have been invested. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Ms. Rasa Yuknevichene, from the head of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly delegation.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues of the press, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly has observed all presidential and parliamentary elections in Ukraine since 2004, at the invitation of all successive Ukrainian authorities. And this time again, we were represented with the 17 observers deployed in the Kiev region and in Odessa. There is really just one main point I would like to stress, and that has to do with context. It is important not to lose sight of the context in which these elections took place. First, we have to remember that Ukraine is at war. In the past 9 months, some 3,700 Ukrainians have lost their lives in an armed conflict that was initiated from Russia. For the first time since the Second World War, and in violation of all rules and principles of international law, an European state, Russian Federation, has annexed by force part of the territory of a neighboring sovereign state, Ukraine. In addition, Kremlin continues to this day to provide political, economic, and military support to illegal armed groups in eastern Ukraine. But this war is not just fought through conventional military means. It combines military action with various other methods aimed at destabilizing Ukraine from the inside, including the use of information or rather disinformation as a weapon. We call this hybrid warfare, which is a part of Kremlin aggressive agenda in all neighboring countries, but not only Ukraine. Despite the ongoing violence in eastern Ukraine, voting took place yesterday in a majority of districts in Donetsk and Luhansk. And special provisions were made to allow those voters, as well as those from Crimea, who unfortunately were not able to vote where they live, to do so somewhere else in the country. This is truly remarkable. Second, we have to remember where Ukraine was just 2 years ago, at the time of the previous parliamentary elections. The same organizations represented there today said in 2012 that the elections were characterized by a lack of a level playing field and the widespread misuse of administrative resources. Remember that 2 prominent opposition candidates were in prison at that time, only 2 years ago. So we said in 2012 that the elections were a step backwards for Ukraine. Today, we are saying that the campaign was competitive, that the misuse of administrative resources was not a major issue, and that these elections marked significant progress. And this again, despite extremely challenging circumstances. So no, Ukraine elections were not perfect, but they are not always perfect in my country, for example, too. And our report is very clear about the problems that remain and that will need to be addressed in future elections for future politicians. But the trend is clear. In just 1 year, Ukraine's democracy has gone a very long way. And today we were able to say that these elections fairly represent the will of Ukrainians voters. This will is clear. European Ukraine in the family of democracies, but not in the hands of corrupt tyranny. The Ukrainian people should be proud of what they did only over 1 year and what they have achieved in just 1 year. This is a good message, a strong message to other countries around, regional countries like Moldova, Belarus, and I am sure to Russia, to Russian Federation, to follow the example of democracy. The parliament that was elected yesterday will have the difficult but important responsibility to carry this work forward and reunite all Ukrainians behind a common project for their country, free from outside interference. I would like to wish them all the best in this challenging task. Myself, being from Lithuania, I know how difficult it is to do these reforms. You are late to start them. We already are on the way to do our country reformed. It will be very difficult, but no other way. And I would like to assure you that the NATO Parliamentary Assembly will stand ready to assist you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn the floor to Ms. Tana de Zulueta from the OSCE ODIHR Election Observation Mission.
Many thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Having been here since the 17th of September and watched preparations for this election over this period, together with the long-term observation mission which was deployed to all the regions, I really would like to thank the Ukrainian government for the invitation we received, but above all, the Ukrainian administration and the election administration here in Kiev and in the regions for the continuous, patient, collaboration which we have received. We have also had the assistance, and this has enabled us in sometimes challenging circumstances to deploy large numbers of people, the assistance of the security forces in this country in making sure that we felt the observers were safe. I would just like to recall, because our conclusions have been illustrated, that the assessment that we presented to you today on whether the election complied with OSCE commitments and Council of Europe standards, as well as international obligations and Ukrainian law, is a preliminary conclusion, and it has been delivered prior to the completion of the election process. The final assessment of this election will depend in part on the conduct of the remaining stages of the election process, and that includes the tabulation of results and the handling of post-election complaints and appeals. I repeat this because at his press conference today, the chairman of the Central Election Commission reminded this morning those present that 10 district election commissions were at that point in time paralyzed. And this would potentially affect the votes of 500,000 people. And here we go back to our findings. We stress, and I think this is most important, how this election was an important step forward for the aspirations of this country and to bring the democratic process in line with their international commitments. But we also point to the things that we think should be addressed. And this includes the functioning of the election administration. One thing we noted was that while we were here, more than half the members of all the district election commissions and a large portion of the precinct election commissions were replaced right up to polling day, indeed on polling day, and that's one of the problems that has arisen. Stability of the election personnel is one of the recommendations, long-standing recommendations, OSCE, ODIHR has brought to the attention of the authorities. The other, of course, is comprehensive election reform. There appears to be consensus on doing this, on making the legislation, bringing it in harmony, and this would be an important step forward. This is the 11th OSCE ODIHR election observation mission to this country. Our interlocutors know our work well, and there is an ongoing dialogue, so we can build constructively on these findings. Another issue which we would like to signal is campaign finance. There has been ongoing dialogue between the Ukraine authorities and OSCE ODIHR on the reform of campaign finance regulations. In this respect, it would be good to move forward to regulations which would ensure full transparency and a genuinely level playing field and equal opportunity. During our time of observation, we also monitored the media. Media plays a crucial role. I speak to you as actors of the media in any election. Television mainly, but also now and increasingly the internet. In this respect, we look forward to see further step forward in the strengthening of a public broadcasting service, which has been introduced in law but has yet to exist in practice. Also, the oversight. The National Broadcasting Council should be able to implement and exercise its responsibilities of oversight in a more robust way. This is particularly important given that television in this country is extremely varied but also dominated by business interests. A word about the representation of women. This is something we report on, and in the past, parliaments have been elected which are well below the world average in terms of the presence of women. An interesting development was the inclusion of large numbers of significant numbers of women on the winnable positions in the proportional list, so we could be looking at a more balanced representation, but this did not extend to the single mandate constituencies. Very few candidates, and we shall see how many elected. But if the women were not yet abundantly represented or will not yet be in the Verkhovna Rada, once again, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that if this election was, by and large, well conducted, the hard work fell on the shoulders of an election administration largely manned by women, and they are still at work. And I would like to thank them and extend my thanks to all of you for attending our press conference, and look forward to other occasions to continue this dialogue.
Thank you to our panelists. Journalists will now have an opportunity to ask some questions of the panelists. Please do wait for the microphone to come to you before you ask your question. And when you do ask your question, please start by stating your name and media affiliation. And with that, we'll take a few questions. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're interested in asking. Yes, please.
Телеканал Україна, Олександр Махов. Скажіть, будь ласка, стосовно явки виборців на цих виборах, якщо говорити про вибори на Донбасі, то, звичайно, низька явка обумовлена тими подіями, які відбуваються на Донбасі. Яка ваша думка щодо загальної явки в інших регіонах, в цілому по Україні, вона вже низька, найнизькою є за всі роки? Дякую.
Thank you for that question. Of course, we always want to have as many voters as possible in any country to use their right to vote. As already described, this country is under extraordinary circumstances. We have a situation where part of the country is illegally annexed by Russia. We have a warlike situation in part of the country. We have hundreds of thousands of IDPs in the country, a tough economic situation, and internal and external threats and security issues. I would say that there is also, after many years now, a concern amongst the people. Many have their doubts in politics. And on the other hand, this is a situation where many also put their hopes in politics. So for us, I think it's very clear that this is a legitimate election when you give the opportunity to people to vote. And we can never force people to vote. We can give them as good opportunities as possible to actually go out and vote. But I think that this country have given the opportunity to people to vote. And they have turned out in numbers around 52%. From some parts in the country it has been very difficult, even though the government controls part of Donbas area. I visited myself last week parts of Lugansk Oblast. I know how difficult people have it in that area, and I know also how difficult it is to actually carry out the elections. So I think the government side here have really done their utmost to see to that they can have election there, but I can also understand that some people might have some difficulty to use their vote. So when you look at that area and the security issues, I think we can have an understanding that some people might not have the ability to use their right to vote. But the bottom line is that we look at this as a legitimate and free election, and whether people choose to use their vote or not is up to the people themselves.
I would like just shortly add that 52% is not for democracies. We would, in Lithuania, we would also like to have turnout as it is in Scandinavian countries. They have very good tradition. But in my country, turnout usually is 50%, not more than 60%. It's very good result, about 60%. So it's mainly that people had possibility to vote. I think it's quite good result for parliamentary election. Presidential election is different because it's very clear understanding what they are doing. I understand that new democracies always are facing very similar turnouts for parliamentary elections.
If I might just add to this point, besides what colleagues have said, we should really underline two main important points. This is the first post-Maidan Vrhovna Rada. There is no doubt about it, the clear legitimacy and the free and fair elections that have taken place. Second point is Ukraine is under the hybrid aggression, and in this context the government made and the Electoral Commission great effort to enable even those citizens who are living in the areas which are not under government control to exercise their right. Whether that in practice could have happened, that is something different, but the effort was made. And I think from that respect we should praise the efforts of the Ukrainian authorities. 52% so far is, from the many European states' point of view, a very solid turnout.
Thank you. Any other questions? Please raise your hand. All right, we don't have any other questions. Before we do have another question, please raise your hand. Aha, the gentleman, please.
Thank you. My name is Kjell Broksø. I'm a Danish journalist, and yesterday I had the pleasure of being election observer for a Danish NGO called Silba. Me and my colleagues were quite impressed by the election, and also this conference have a happy message saying that this was a success, period, bottom line. What is next? This is a political question, so therefore I would like to ask the parliamentary representatives about this, because we have agreements of associations in the future, but what a lot of Ukrainians really want is a full membership of NATO and also EU. Would your message to the people be give that up, or would there be a chance in the future? Thank you.
Who would like to answer?
I just want to say that we have been here as observer missions and observing the elections, and we have not been here on any campaign mission. Yet I know that two of my colleagues, at least along this table, can speak on behalf of their assemblies, but the bottom line is the choice of the Ukrainian people themselves and their now elected leaders. So maybe we shouldn't recommend or choose for them. I think what we have done here is to try to safeguard through the observation mission to help to keep these elections as clean, as free, as transparent as possible. And then it's the choice of the Ukrainian people and their now elected leaders to make their choices and decisions for the country.
I would like to stress, to underline that NATO Parliamentary Assembly is not part of NATO as a structure. It's Parliamentary Assembly is a body of members of Parliament. They have their delegations to Parliamentary Assembly gathering. But my answer would be saying that I agree what my colleague from Sweden just said, that it's up to Ukrainians themselves, of course, to apply, first of all, to decide to apply, to discuss among themselves to the organizations they would like to join. But I can say only by my own example of my own country. I would not imagine my country today without membership in NATO and EU. It would be impossible to survive. We would be in the same situation as the other countries. They were occupied by Bolsheviks and Soviet Union before. For us, it's fundamental to have our state as we have it now, with democracy, with freedom, with developing our economy and other things. So if this example is important and interesting for Ukraine and Ukrainian people, we will do everything the best to help to do this.
If I may also answer, since the question was directed to the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine, and I will shortly put the hat that I have as the co-chair of the future Parliamentary Association Committee between Verkhovna Rada and the European Parliament. And I think that the results of the elections, especially for those parties who won the biggest support, is actually a very clear message of the European orientation of the Ukrainian people. What we expect from the European Parliament, that the new government, after the constitution of Verkhovna Rada is very quickly formed, and that the work continues on the European reform agenda. The first step is, of course, the application of the association agreement. It is a framework that will enable Ukraine to undertake political, economic and sectorial reforms. Of course, what you mentioned, the membership, that is a step after the association agreement, and it is up to the Ukrainian authorities in the dialogue with the EU institutions to discuss that matter when the right time in the future comes. Now it's important to help Ukraine undertake the European reforms, and this is what we shall be doing in the course of the European Parliament activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Barnett?
Thank you. Actually, your question might be useful in a Western country, but I doubt whether it's so good right now for the Ukraine itself. The Ukraine has to heal first. The country itself has to come together first, and they have much more other problems to solve first before they think about NATO or anything like this. So please, we were just observing elections. Now we have to help them consolidate their own country, get rid of corruption, get working places, get a good education, help them with their infrastructure. That is much more important right now. Then let's do one step after the other and don't do the 10th step before we have done the first, please.
Thank you. I see another hand, please, the lady here. Microphone. Thank you.
Добрий день, Ганна Котовичук, телеканал ЗІК. Ми представляємо Західний регіон, і я би хотіла запитати, чи фіксували ваші спостерігачі якісь особливості голосування у Західному регіоні України, як пройшли вибори там, і, зокрема, це стосується голосування переміщених осіб, оскільки ми знаємо, що багато людей переїхало зі сходу України на захід у зв'язку із складною ситуацією в Україні. Дякую дуже.
Thank you. Kent, Mr. Harsted.
I think when it comes to reaching out to the IDPs, we recognize and appreciate the efforts that have been made by the Central Election Commission and Ukraine as such to try to accommodate all those people who have been forced to flee from Crimea, from the Donbas area to other parts of the country. Actually, when I was monitoring myself, I asked specifically about whether voters have been able to vote in those stations I went to, asking them if there was any coming from this Crimea or the Donbas area. And I found voters, not en masse, but definitely voters that have been able to vote in those voting stations. And I think we recognize in our statement the efforts that has been made and appreciate it. As you know, elections are not only done on election day. It takes even more to mobilize voters. And given the very difficult situation many of these people are in, trying to provide for their families, have fled from certain places in the country to try to make a livelihood somewhere else, it's very difficult maybe to hope for that they prioritize politics first of all. Maybe many of them are in very difficult situations. But having that said, we recognize the efforts done by Ukraine to try to reach out to these hundreds of thousands of people that now are internally displaced all over the country. And maybe I would like to ask Madame Zulueta to maybe fill in even more concerning this issue. But this is what we as a whole have recognized in our statement. We think they have done positive things, both when it comes to the legislation and other efforts by the state to reach out to them. The mobilizing factor might be difficult in the situation where they are.
I think there's nothing to add to what Mr. Arstedt said. You know the numbers who actually managed to vote or registered to vote. 35,000.
Thank you. I think we have a question right here, please.
Carol Williams with the Los Angeles Times. Are any of you concerned that after the Ukrainian voters have sent such a clear signal of support for better relations with the European Union and the West in general, that this could further aggravate tensions with Russia and prevent a swift resolution of the conflict that's still going on in the East?
I think we can share that question, but I don't want to go too far. I think it's a great responsibility resting on the new parliament and government in this country. I think they need a little time to consolidate the new situation in the country, to have the time to let democracy have its path, to form the coalition that will be the government, to see to the priorities of the country, and then we'll see what choices they will make. I mean, whatever choice they make, Russia will be the big neighbor, whatever choices they make. And I don't want to go too far, but a new government need to take this issue as one of their priorities and try to find a good solution to this issue, both in relation to EU, to Russia, and to other neighbors, and to try to move on. But it is the choices of the Ukrainian people and their leaders.
I think it's a very valid point which you made, because after these elections and the clear political signal given by the majority of the Ukrainians, nobody can question the legitimacy of the European direction of the country. This is important. This is where the message from Euromaidan has received a political endorsement of the citizens of Ukraine, and I'm sure that Moscow will also have to take it into account. It is up to the Ukrainian authorities, with a lot of help of international community now, to assist it in peacefully reintegrating its territory into country's constitutional and legal order.
But yes, I am sure that has to be support from Western countries if we want to use unique opportunity of our generation for the completion of Europe in democratic way. Europe is not only Western Europe. Because of the sad history, this part of Europe became some different kind of people, different kind of Europe. But they have right to be in the same path as other Western countries. They didn't suffer communism had. So we need to think about some kind of new Marshall Plan for the support of the country. They have these aspirations. And I think today political will has to be in both sides, in Ukrainian side and in other side. We still say other side of Europe. Especially they have different history for 50 years.
No, actually, coming back.
Can I just say, I don't think it's a straight alternative. I think that Ukraine can be good neighbours with both the European Union and with the Russian Federation. And I think one of the problems is that the Russian Federation has got the impression over a period of time that the EU is keen to absorb and take over Ukraine in the same way as they suggest that NATO is trying to take over Ukraine. Ultimately, the future of a country depends on the will of its people. And what I detect in these elections is not that the people are saying we want to link in with the European Union and leave our connections with Russian Federation. What they're saying is they want to have a strong country, the sovereignty of which is recognised by all its neighbours.
Coming back to your question, whether the Russians accept the election, I could read already in the news, on the news channels, that the Russians do so. And this is a very good sign, because we need the Russians as a partner to help to stop the fighting in the east and to get the Ukraine back together and let the country heal. And therefore it's a good sign that that Moscow already acknowledged the elections.
Let me just say that through yesterday's performance here in Ukraine, Ukraine leadership is now re-energized and strengthened. The fresh election and the new mandate by the people of Ukraine give the Ukraine leadership an opportunity to find the path, both dealing with the issue of peace, but also leading to prosperity. That is the great responsibility now for the new leadership of the country.
Any additional questions? Thank you very much. Before we close, I would just like to say that the full statement is available online, and there should be paper copies outside of this hall. And with that, thank you all very much for coming.